Good morning, Year 10. I hope you are well. Today we are going to begin looking at our Language Paper 1 assessments and getting some feedback on those. You should have received an email from me that includes your marked Language Paper 1 responses from the 4th and the 5th of February. What I would like you to do is make sure that you have your original responses from the assessment, as well as having opened my feedback that I have sent you via email. If you didn't complete the assessment, which is incredibly disappointing, there is a model version on Show My Homework for you to use. So there is an original copy of someone's answer, and then there's also my comments on that answer. And you can use this to access the feedback today. So pause the video and come back when you have your original Language Paper 1 response and my feedback open and ready in front of you, please. Okay, if you're back, that means that you have your original response and then you have my marked response in front of you. And they're going to form the basis of the rest of this week, so please make sure you save it and keep them in a safe place. Before we get into any of the feedback, could you please pause the video and come back when you have copied down the title, date and learning objective, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you're ready to complete the do now, and we're going to continue working on our spelling, punctuation and grammar. I was actually quite impressed with the accuracy of some of your writing. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at question 5, but it does show that, continuous practice of correcting spelling, punctuation and grammar is very useful. With that in mind, can you pause the video and complete the do now by copying the sentences and correcting any errors? Okay, if you're back, that means you're ready to make your purple pen corrections. As always, give it a tick if you got it right. If you got it wrong, just cross it out and write the correct answer, please. So, number 1 is an example of a comma splice, as is number 4. A comma splice is where you join two independent clauses with a comma, and instead we should use a semicolon, a full stop, or a conjunction. Number 2 is a complex sentence with a dependent and independent clause that needs to be separated by a comma. Number 3 has an embedded clause here that can be removed from the sentence and the sentence will still make sense. And you can offset that with brackets, dashes, or a comma. And then number 5, we have that fronted adverbial of every minute, and that needs to be separated with a comma also. Pause the video and come back when you've made any purple pen corrections that you need to, please. Okay, so before we get into any of the feedback, I just want to revisit the question 2 from the assessment to just refresh your mind about what you were asked to do. So this was the question 2. Look in detail at this extract from lines 14 to 23 of the source, and it gave that part of the source in a box for you here. Let's have a read of it. Rosie had made a quick check of the unfamiliar garden before letting the children go out to play. The bottom half of the garden was an overgrown mess, a muddle of trees and shrubs. An ancient mulberry tree stood at the centre. Its massive twisted branches drooped to the ground in places, its knuckles in the earth like a gigantic malformed hand. The wintry sun hung low in the sky, and the gnarled growth threw long twisted shadows across the undergrowth within its cage. The trunk of the tree was snarled with the tangled ivy that grew up through the broken bricks and chunks of cement, choking it. The path that led down towards the fence at the bottom, which marked the garden off from an orchard beyond, disappeared into a mass of nettles and brambles before it reached the padlocked door. The question is, as always, how does the writer use language here to describe the garden? You can include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, or sentence forms. And as always, there are 8 marks up for grabs. So we'll look at this in a little bit more detail, and I'll unpick this for you later in a lot more detail. But for now, let's talk about what we did well. As always, I was very impressed with some of your ability to generate some sophisticated ideas about the garden. For example, I saw things such as presents the garden as abnormal and unfamiliar, presents the garden as wild and untamed, presents the garden as dominating and sinister. It's interesting here that there are 3 different ideas. A lot of you did struggle to generate more than kind of one idea. A lot of you had one paragraph saying it was abnormal, and then another paragraph saying it's unfamiliar, and they are quite similar ideas. But on the screen here, we technically have the three focuses of our paragraph with those different and sophisticated adjectives to describe the garden. So what I'd like you to do is go to your question 2 response and highlight any sophisticated adjectives used to describe the garden. So for example, if I'm one of the students on the screen, I would grab my highlighter and highlight abnormal, unfamiliar, wild, untamed, dominating, and sinister. If you don't think that you have any sophisticated adjectives, that's fine, but in Purple Pen it might be a good idea to add the highlighted ones on the screen so you know what is expected of you. Pause the video and complete this task for me now, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you've highlighted your sophisticated adjectives or you've added some if you were missing those. Now, let's talk about what we can do to improve. Now, the main thing, before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty stuff, the main thing was throughout the language paper that you simply didn't write enough. The paragraphs that you had wrote were underdeveloped, too small, and you didn't write enough. There was only a very, very, very small number of you that actually completed all of the expected paragraphs for every single question. Maybe that was a time issue, and that's okay, we'll practice that. Or maybe it was because you didn't understand what was happening. Again, we'll work on that. Or you were just being lazy and you rushed it. And if that's the case, then it's a massive shame because you massively reduce the amount of marks that you are capable of achieving. So we will work on speed and producing full responses to every single question. But today I want to focus on this EBI on the screen. I want us to start hinging our analysis to a quotation and then unpicking that quotation in detail. A lot of us forgot to focus on language, that being the key to the question and the key to picking up marks. A lot of us instead struggled to come up with an abundance of ideas, and then the piece ended up being a little bit repetitive and a little bit underdeveloped. For example, I saw a lot of responses that looked like this. We start with this idea about the garden being abandoned. We have a bunch of quotes, and then the analysis is just a little bit underdeveloped here. We have this bit of analysis for the adjective mess. Then we have it also talking about being untidy and dirty, and the idea that is repulsive. We've only really analysed the word mess here, and we have all of these quotes that we could have unpicked and analysed in a lot more detail. For example, also we have this one, where we can see, if I just remove the highlighting from before, we can see that it is very underdeveloped, and the only piece of analysis that we do have here is this one here about the word overgrown. The points in these two students' paragraphs are not incorrect, they are not wrong, they are just not developed enough. They are not focused enough on language and its impact. So how do we fix that? So this was the checklist that we've been working with. This is the checklist that a lot of you have been using for your question 2 responses. And I thought this checklist was quite simple, but I think we need to strip it back even further to have the ability to produce 3 really developed paragraphs. So I have simplified the checklist for you. As you can see, it looks a lot cleaner, it looks a lot less overwhelming, and hopefully it'll be easier for you to navigate. So let me talk you through it. So, like I said, I want you to hinge your analysis to a quotation, focusing on the language and the quote instead of your own idea about the garden. So we are going to start with an embedded quotation, and I know this goes kind of against everything we do in our literature papers, but for this question I think it's going to make a big difference. So you start off talking about what the writer is describing, and then you embed a quotation. That quotation is the focus of the entire paragraph. Then you make your point. You say what effect this quote has on the reader, what it makes them think or feel. So you can say this conveys the idea that, or this highlights, emphasizes, and suggests. Then we're going to explain. So we're going to name the method, so the word or the device, explain how it works, What is it comparing? What does it have connotations of or associations to? What is it personifying it as? What is the semantic field here? And then you're going to link back to the question. What did it tell us about the garden, or the focus of the question? Then at the end, we make a link. This idea that we've talked about here is reinforced and enhanced when, and then we choose and unpick a different quotation from the extract. And then we introduce a writer's big idea at the end. What is the writer suggesting? Why has the writer chosen this language? For what purpose? What are they trying to make us think about? What are they trying to make us visualize and feel? And that's what we put at the end there. Don't be overwhelmed, because this is basically this, but just in a different order and in a simplified format. So hopefully it'll be easier for you to navigate. So let's approach the question in this way. So we're hinging our focus of our paragraphs on quotations. We know that we need to write, three paragraphs. That's total. The focus of those three paragraphs would be three quotations. So I would look at my extract and I would do the following. I would grab my highlighter and I would highlight the focus of the question, which is the garden. I know that's what I'm going to be focusing on, and I know that's what I need to choose quotations to support. So let's have a look at this extract here. There's a lot of quotes to unpick. I would only normally ask you to highlight three. They would form the basis of your paragraphs, but because we want to make links, I think it's beneficial that we highlight as many things as possible that we can use in our paragraphs. If we make a link in each of our paragraphs to another quote, that means we need 2 quotes for each paragraph, totaling 6. The more you have highlighted in the extract, and the more that you have identified from the extract, the more likely you are to be able to produce 3 full developed paragraphs based on those quotes. So let's have a little look at some of the things that we might want to pick out of this extract. So if it was me, I would highlight this quote here: overgrown mess, a muddle of trees and shrubs. The idea of things being kind of overgrown and like muddled and a bit of a mess creates this kind of disorder. I would probably talk about the fact that it's kind of described as massive and twisted branches. Shows that it's kind of like quite complex, and also that it's massive. It seems a bit overpowering. I would also talk about this here, which is a simile. Like a gigantic malformed hand. I would also unpick the undergrowth within its cage, and that is a metaphor. It kind of suggests that it is like imprisoned. It has imprisoned the rest of the garden. There's some quite violent verbs here, like snarled and choking. There's also kind of a lot of like nettles and brambles, indicates that like it could cause like harm. We also have the alliteration here: broken bricks and chunks of cement. So there's a lot here that we can unpick. For the sake of this, I'm going to annotate a little bit. You might not have time to do this in the assessment, but I think it's good for you to see how much language that actually is for you to unpick. A lot of us didn't manage to analyse language devices such as similes and the metaphor. Most of us focused on kind of verbs and adjectives, which is okay, but considering this extract is full of imagery and devices, it was a shame to see that some of us didn't analyse things in a little bit more detail. So as you can see here, I'm just unpicking this, giving myself some ideas to analyse my quotes with. So there's loads on the screen right now that I can use for writing a paragraph. So I've read the extract, I've focused on the question, I've picked out my quotes, I've picked out some words and phrases and language features and some ideas based on those. And now it's time to write. So, like I say, this is the checklist that we are going to use now. So let's write a paragraph together. I normally wouldn't ask you to write this paragraph down, but today I would like you to write this paragraph down in purple pen as I am writing it in your exercise books. Because at the end of the lesson, we're going to have a fully developed, complete question 2 response in purple pen. This is going to be our first paragraph for that. So pause the video now, grab your purple pen and get your exercise book open and get ready to write along with me. Okay, if you're back, that means we're ready to start writing. So I'm looking at my checklist here, and I know my first thing I need to include is evidence. So I'm going to start when describing, and I'm going to choose a particular item in the garden. I'm not going to write when describing the garden. I'm going to be much more specific than that. And I'm going to write when describing the mulberry tree. So I have the extract open on my phone with those annotations on, so I can see that. Obviously, you would also have that in front of you in an assessment conditions. So when describing the mulberry tree, and now I'm going to embed my quotes. I'm going to write, the writer states, and I'm going to use this quote, that it has knuckles in the earth like a gigantic malformed hand. So that is my evidence done. I'm going to just highlight that so I know that it's complete. Now I'm going to talk about the effect on the reader, what it makes them think or feel. And I'm going to use this sentence starter here. So I'm going to write, this conveys the idea that. So if the tree is being described as having like knuckles and being this like big gigantic hand, it kind of makes me think that it's like a dominating part of the garden. So I'm going to write, this conveys the idea that the tree is a dominating, and the fact that it's like malformed and it's a hand, it almost kind of implies that it's like alive, which is quite like supernatural. So I'm going to say that the tree is dominating, that the tree is a dominating and supernatural force in the garden. And I have done my point. I've written my quote and I've said what that conveys about that particular item in the garden, in this case the tree. Now is where I explain, this is where I analyse, this is where I analyse language and ultimately answer the question. So first I need to name the method, so this is a simile here, that's what I'm going to analyse. The simile, and I need to explain how it works. So the simile is always a comparison, so I'm going to write, the simile compares the tree to a large hand. I've explained that there is a simile there, and I've explained that I know how it works and what it is comparing. The simile compares a tree to a large hand, and now I need to analyse with focus on the tree and the garden and the question. So a large hand, which implies, well, if you're saying that a tree is like a hand, it's almost like it has like a human intention to like dominate the garden and like control the garden. So I'm going to write, which implies that the tree has an almost human intention to rule over the garden and influence the rest of the garden. I just imagine like this, like kind of like, you know, like the idea of like an iron fist being like thrown down and like making their mark, and I'm in charge, I control this garden, is what I kind of imagine that to be. So I've done my explanation there. Now I'm going to do my evaluation, and firstly I'm going to make a link. So I'm going to start off with that sentence starter there. I'm going to say, this idea is enhanced when, and then I'm going to add a new quotation. So again, I'm looking at the mulberry tree as a focus here, and it's also described with the adjective twisted and massive. So when the writer describes the tree as twisted and massive, and these are all quotes that I've already highlighted and got ideas for, so I'm just picking them up from the extract and putting them into my paragraph. And then I could leave it there. I could leave that as a sentence there, but I need to analyse language, so I need to go a bit further and say which conveys. The fact that it's massive shows that it's like dominating, so I'm going to use a different word for dominating and say authoritative, which conveys the authoritative size. Oh, there we go. Size. And the fact that it's like twisted, like I'm imagining, like, you know, when you say someone's twisted, you're implying they're like a bit like sinister and a bit evil. So I'm going to say which conveys the authoritative size and sinister appearance of the tree. And finally, I need to do my writer's big idea. So again, I'm just going to use that sentence starter, and I'm going to write, therefore, the writer is exploring. It just seems like the writer's emphasizing kind of like how overwhelming and like profound and dominant and overpowering nature can be. So I'm going to write, the writer is exploring the way that nature can be dominating, and I'm linking that actually back to my original idea about the tree, and can be dominating and almost overwhelming. And then I have completed my evaluation. So this is nothing unlike what we've been doing before. We've just switched it around a little bit. It's clearer. Our analysis is focused entirely on language, and we've unpicked that language in detail. It's a lot kind of clearer and more precise. So, as you can probably guess, what I would like you to do now is go to your question 2 response and use the improved structure on screen on the right hand side here to redraft your final 2 paragraphs for question 2. So the paragraph that we have just written together is our first paragraph, and now you need to use some other quotations from the extract to write your final 2 paragraphs using this new structure. Remember to focus on analysing language, verbs and adjectives, and devices, metaphors, personification, similes, alliteration, all of those things. If you need to rewind the video and go back to where I annotated the extract and do the same to yours, you're more than welcome to. But please do try to generate some independent and individual ideas throughout your explanation. Pause the video and return when you have completed your final 2 paragraphs for question 2 in purple pen, please. Okay, if you're back, that means that you should have a full question 2 response with 3 purple pen paragraphs using this new structure. Now it's time to submit, so please make sure you send the corrections that you've made directly onto your question 2 response, and make sure that you send your improved redraft question 2 response. I look forward to seeing all of your excellent hard work. Well done. I will see you in tomorrow's video lesson.